Before I start the actual presentation, let me just give you a broad outline of who I am. So, I've grown up my father was a Finnish diplomat, so I grew up in different parts of the world. I've lived in China, I've lived in Saudi Arabia, I've lived in all kinds of different countries. And after completing my BA and my MA in economics at Cambridge University in England, I ended up working for big investment banks. So I spent 11 years with Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch in New York and London before I set up my own business, which was basically a business to focused on investing in Central and Eastern Europe. And this was in the early to mid 1990s, when there was a lot of optimism about the future of this region, including Russia. In fact, I had an office in St. Petersburg, and we were quite active in investing in the Russian economy in the 90s. Since then, time has moved on, and the world today looks very, very different from what we had in the 90s. And today, at the request of my good friend Janos, I'll talk a little bit about what we're likely to see. On the 24th of February 2022, the world changed. But it didn't change because of what is happening in the Ukraine. We actually don't know. We can, I certainly hope that the Ukrainians will defeat the Russian invaders, but we do not know how the war will end in the Ukraine. We can only hope for the best. What we can say already now, though, is that the repercussions of what Putin did in the Ukraine will be infinitely greater than even the war itself in the Ukraine. So what has happened is that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has led to a reaction in the Western world, which will change society and the world that we live in forever. So, in very broad strokes, what has happened is that the West has come to see that we cannot rely on energy imports from Russia. But in the medium to long term, we also want to, as you all know, we want to move away from fossil fuels anyway. So what the war in the Ukraine has done, it has led the West to take the decisions necessary to implement a much, much faster rollout of the green economy so we will be going through the green transition much faster than we had expected, and would have been the case on the 23rd of February of this year if it hadn't been for Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. Now, I will talk a little bit about the green transition, but mainly I will talk about what it's going to do to Russia. Russia is a large country. It's a huge source of not only fossil fuel energy exports to the rest of the world and especially to Europe, but also other natural resources. And what Putin has done to Russia is unfortunately for Russia, is he's set in motion a process which, regardless of how the war in the Ukraine ends, will lead to the collapse of the Russian economy. This will lead to other very, very interesting, exciting, potentially very dangerous repercussions, because what's going to happen after the collapse of the Russian economy is we're going to see a very fierce competition between the West and China to ensure control over the Russian resources, the Russian economy post-collapse. Now, before I go into all of that, let me just explain to you why the Russian economy will collapse. Russia is, or has an economy that is, well, it's roughly, or it was before the war, it was roughly the size of Spain, maybe somewhere between the size of Holland and the size of Spain. It's not an important economy for the world in any way other than in its ability to supply a lot of fossil fuels, basically. When you look at this chart here, you will understand what Russia is and why, as an economy, it has only one purpose in this world, which is to supply the more developed parts of the world with resources. So when we talk about fossil fuels, these are billions of dollars in 2019 for the annualized, how many billions of dollars of sales there were of the main export articles. And you will immediately notice one thing. Russia doesn't really export anything other than resources. It's a developing economy. It cannot be compared to advanced, developed Western economies. You will also see that if you add up the fossil fuel related exports, they are the vast bulk, 90% of total Russian export. Everything else they export, all put together, adds up to maybe 10% or so. And even a lot of that is related to energy. So potassic fertilizers, for example, nitrogenous fertilizers, of course, are a function of natural gas. You need a lot of energy to produce them. You need natural gas to produce these fertilizers. So basically, fossil fuels is what Russia is all about. Now, until the 24th of February, the world didn't like Putin. I don't think anybody outside of Russia very much likes Putin, but it was willing to live with Putin, was willing to live with Russia, because the West consists of democracies, and it's not very easy to tell people that, listen, we're going to do something about this bad guy Putin, and it's going to mean that petrol prices will rise 50% or 100% or whatever it may be. That would not be very popular, and very few politicians could have gained a lot of support by propagating such political action. I'm, as Janos intimated, I have recently gone into politics, so I am responsible for economic and budgetary policy for Eesti 200, which is a new political party, one of the three big parties, I hope very soon the biggest in this country in terms of opinion polls at least. And of course, what I would have had, and I was working on finalizing the economic and budgetary policy platform for the party, and now after the war, it's, we're having to redo it because it's we're gonna live in a very different world. But that's me. A lot of far more important people who actually are in power in Western countries are going through the same exercise. They're saying that, with this war, Putin has shown himself to be no better than Hitler, no better than Stalin, no better than other madmen in history who basically attacked their neighbors, killed innocent people, and so forth. And we cannot accept this. This is not acceptable. We have to crush this man. Unfortunately, because of the way Russia is set up and because of the way the current regime has killed the free media in Russia, he's managed to portray the war of aggression in Ukraine as something in the interest of Russia, and opinion polls in Russia show that the people, or the majority of the people, actually support it. So unfortunately, there's no hope of people in Russia waking up and saying, this is wrong, let's get rid of this madman and put in place a more normal government. this is not going to happen. So what we have to do is we have to crush the economy, because only by crushing the economy can we get rid of the current regime. Now, what does that mean? It means that, and it's already happening, the world will have to do, to a very large extent, without all these exports. They add up, or even fossil fuels, because the fossil fuel prices are actually higher today than they were in 2019. So it has been calculated that by continuing to buy fossil fuels from Russia at the rate that we have been doing until the war started, we were basically giving Russia $1 billion every day, which was being invested into the war machine that he's put to use against Ukraine. $1 billion a day. So what we have to do is we have to find a way to stop that. We have to find a way to no longer pay him $1 billion a day. But of course, it's impossible to do it literally from one day to the next. So it's a process that will be taking place over the coming months, but it is taking place, and the repercussions are pretty clear. So where does Russia stand as a supplier of fossil fuels to the European Union? And as you can see, the biggest problem we have is with natural gas. We import about 41% of, 41% of EU imports of natural gas. Of course, we produce natural gas as well in the EU, but of the imports, 41% is from Russia. 47% of coal imports comes from Russia. Again, the EU is largely self-sufficient in coal, but we do import coal as well. And 27% roughly of oil comes from Russia. So what we have to do now, the challenge that we are facing, if we want to crush the Russian economy in order to get rid of Putin and his regime, we have to stop buying this stuff from Russia. But it's a big step, because if you stop that from one day to the next, it will have a huge impact on European industrial production. It will have an impact on warming buildings. It will have an impact on electricity production. So we have to do it in a well laid out. We have to have a well laid out plan. We have to have a shorter term plan and a longer term plan. Now, what we are therefore working on in Europe is we're working on finding ways to replace Russian fossil fuel imports with fossil fuel imports from other countries in the short term. This will inevitably lead to high prices, because you can't just cut out a major supplier of fossil fuels in the world economy without impacting the price levels at which you buy fossil fuels. It means, however, if we go back, that a lot of these smaller exporters of fossil fuels to the European Union will actually have sort of an extended lease of life in terms of making money out of supplying the European Union, because they will be replacing Russia. So it's unlikely that as we go through the process of the green transition, it's unlikely that the demand for fossil fuels from these non-Russian countries will drop as fast as they might have expected until very recently. So some countries will actually benefit, some export countries. So the Arab countries, some African countries, and others who have been exporting oil, and especially oil, but to some extent gas. Now, this is a statement by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. And if you read what she says, it is basically, in a nutshell, she basically says that we will dramatically speed up the green transition, and we will do it because we have to find a way to live without Russian fossil fuel imports. So if until the 24th of February of this year, when Russia invaded Ukraine, if until then the debate in Europe was about, yes, we want a green transition, but there were some politicians who were saying maybe we shouldn't, maybe we should take it easy, and we don't need to, go through it so fast because it's going to have negative impact on the economy and so forth. Today, there is a political consensus that we need to push through a green transition. We need to push through a move away from fossil fuels much, 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 much faster than was the case before the invasion of Ukraine. The reason for that is not only what it has been so far, which is that we need to save the planet in the longer run. The reason for that now is that we have to cut out Russian fossil fuel imports in order to crush the Russian economy, in order to facilitate regime change in Russia. And this is what Europe, America, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, all the, let's say, developed economies in the world are pretty much united in wanting to do. How is that going to be done? Well, again, I've just basically taken a slide from the EU's website. We're obviously going to, in every way possible, try to become more energy efficient. So the investments that are going to go into energy efficiency are going to shoot up from what was already being planned. There are enormous gains to be had in energy efficiency. So, for example, in a country like Estonia, where the vast majority of the housing stock dates back to Soviet days, the housing stock is incredibly energy inefficient. So, with well-tailored investments into improving the energy efficiency of the housing stock alone, Estonia could become much more energy efficient, would need less energy for its economy. And the same goes for just about everything we do. We can become more energy efficient in just about everything we do. And that's what we're going to see happening now. And it's going to be turbocharged because of the need to crush the Russian economy. We're going to see diversification of gas supplies, which means there's going to be a lot of investment into LNG terminals so that we can bring in liquefied natural gas as an interim solution, so we don't need to buy Russian gas through the pipelines. Instead, we'll buy it from other parts of the world and bring it into Europe through LNG terminals. We're going to speed up the permitting of renewables. Here in Estonia, for example, there's been a lot of criticism of how slow the state has been in granting permits to build large offshore wind farms. This is going to change. It's all going to happen very, very quickly now. There's going to be even more investment into solar panels. We're going to explore geothermal power. If you put a hole down 4 or 5 kilometers into the ground, you reach an area which is extremely hot, and you can actually create a lot of energy through geothermal power. Biomass, biomethane, other ways of creating energy that is basically environmentally sustainable, and very importantly in today's world means that we're replacing energy imports from Russia. The hydrogen accelerator. When we have a lot of wind power, and we will have much, much, much more wind power in the coming years, we need a way to store this energy when it's not being used, because the wind blows when the wind blows, but we might need energy when the wind isn't blowing. So how do we store the energy? It's hydrogen. We're going to convert this electricity that is produced. When there's more electricity being produced than is needed, it's going to be converted into hydrogen. There are other ways of storing it as well, but hydrogen is going to be the key method for doing so. And of course, we are going to see the development of a hydrogen economy. what is happening now is very interesting because the catalyst that basically the war in Ukraine constitutes, the catalyst for dramatically speeding up the green transition, it's there. It's not going to go away. Even when the war is over, and I think for the vast bulk of the world, we're hoping that these brave Ukrainians will prevail and that they will defeat the Russian armies that have come to occupy the country. But whatever happens, the war cannot go on forever. It's going to end. But this is not going to end when the war ends. The need to get rid of the Russian regime, which can only be done through crushing the Russian economy, will not disappear. Therefore, this whole green transition, or the turbocharging of the green transition, as it were, will not go away. It's going to continue. Basically, the repercussions of this, of course, is that there's going to be a whole new, or I shouldn't say a whole new, there are going to be huge numbers of new industries that will develop as part of the process of decarbonization, as part of the process of the green transition. The technology that will be required to carry out a comprehensive green transition, to basically create a world eventually, in the first place a Western world, but eventually an entire world that basically does not abuse the resources that we have here in the planet to basically kill the planet, that will ensure that we can have a planet that grows richer without killing off the environment we live in. The technology that will basically be developed to make this all happen will offer enormous, absolutely enormous business opportunities. And for young people like you guys, this is where my advice to you is, this is what you should be looking at. This is where the future lies. Now, where does that leave the world? Where does that leave Europe? Well, if we, as we basically move through the green transition, what it means is that if we have been paying Russia $1 billion a day for fossil fuel imports, we will no longer be paying Russia $1 billion a day in fossil fuel imports. Now, what it means is that Europe will become self-sufficient in energy. Not overnight, it's going to take some time, but it's going to happen. And it's going to be self-sufficient in green energy, which is sustainable energy. The money that historically we have spent on importing fossil fuels, and $1 billion is just to Russia. We're also spending a lot of money importing fossil fuels from the Middle East and other places. That is no longer going to be spent on importing fossil fuels. So it's going to be reinvested, I should imagine, in the bigger scheme of things, mainly into further developing the green economy. So it should mean a dramatic boost for the growth potential of the European economy. So as funny as it sounds, and as tragic as the Russian invasion of Ukraine is, what it's likely to lead to is the defeat or the crushing of the Russian economy. It's likely to lead over the coming years to a reinvigoration of the European economy, because Europe actually, of all the large developed economies, Europe is the only one that has been very, very heavily dependent on importing fossil fuels. America, Canada, Australia, these types of countries, they pretty much have their own fossil fuels. They don't have to import them. Japan is maybe, and South Korea are comparable maybe to Europe. They will be huge beneficiaries of the green transition. Those who are America and Canada and others will no doubt be part of the green transition, but on a net basis, they're not going to gain as much as Europe, Japan, South Korea. The losers, the big-time loser, of course, is going to be Russia, because the whole aim now of what Europe, supported by the other Western countries, is going to do is to basically crush the current regime in Russia by crushing the economy. Other losers, are easy to list. It's basically the energy, fossil fuel exporting countries. So, if you take, for most of them, as I was explaining earlier, because the focus of cutting back on fossil fuel imports will be on cutting back on Russian fossil fuel imports. It means that a lot of the other countries will not be as severely impacted. In fact, they will probably be able to continue to export fossil fuels, in fact, at very high prices for quite some time to come, as the West is focused on crushing the Russians. So, when you start to think about the dynamics of what is going to be happening over the coming years, they're pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's logical. And you can all draw your own conclusions as to what it means for different parts of the world, different countries, and what it maybe means for you guys as students in terms of the sort of jobs that you will look to find when you graduate. I think that was my last slide, so I'm happy to have a bit of a discussion now. Let me ask whether or not somebody is, willing to stand up and say, you've got it all wrong. You've misunderstood something to me, in other words. Yeah.
I have some question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm from Iran. And actually, I experienced a lot of sanctions. And I attend to a lot of protesting. And I was always against my regime. Actually, I can say these sanctions is not that much useful for regime. They are sacrifice people because of the benefit, and we saw that, and we feel with our skin, and because they don't care about the money that come from out of the country. They just put them people underprivileged and use their money. Right now in Iran, it's approximately about 10 years we are under sanction, and still we can see last night they did something wrong, and still they are resist, and they put the name on it, resist economy. It is meaningless for people, and most of the people are against them, but they have power, they have gun, they have everything that they can stop protesting. I believe whole this story is good, but it's not that much useful for stop the regime. They are doing what they want, and they sacrifice everything that they need. I have some sort of questions, but after.
Well, I'll tackle what you just said, which was extremely well argued, and of course, I think in terms of debating the whole issue of how to sanction Russia, the Iranian example, is an important one to keep in mind. And we, of course, in terms of the democratic debate in the West, there will always be a group of politicians who will argue that we mustn't sanction Russia so severely because it's just going to hurt the people as opposed to the regime. Now, that may be. But the fact is that we want to crush the Russian economy in order to facilitate regime change. But we are willing to crush the Russian economy even without regime change, because if we do not do it, even if Putin ends up in some sort of this current Ukrainian war ends up in some sort of a stalemate, Putin is just going to step back, he's going to lick his wounds, and he's going to attack again. Maybe he'll attack us here in the Baltics, or, maybe he'll attack Finland and Sweden, who knows. But he will do it. So as long as Putin and his regime are in power, we will sanction them. And we will sanction them, as Ursula von der Leyen has pointed out, by basically stopping the import of Russian fossil fuel. And it might hurt the people of Russia. It might cause them pain. But, Russia has a lot of food. They're not going to starve. And they'll just have to put up with the pain. But we cannot risk letting this madman get his hands on the financing that would be required to rebuild the Russian armed forces and go for the next victim. Russia will be sanctioned, and those politicians who argue that this will cause pain to the Russian people, they are a minority, and they will not be the ones who end up being the ones taking the decisions. So, but it's a very good point, and it's very important in the debates here in the Western world to keep in mind the fact that we cannot guarantee that even the severest sanctions will lead to a rapid collapse of the Russian regime. They will lead to a collapse of the Russian economy, but the regime might actually, because it's ruthless, Putin doesn't mind, if he has to kill a few thousand demonstrators and whatever, he'll do it, but we still have to do it.
And if I may add, if we talk about green transition, then crushing Russian economy was not the first reason for that. I mean, and even not the main reason, because before that, as you mentioned, before that already we tried to save the world or save the planet. Well, we still do.
In the long run, the green transition is needed in order for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to actually have a place to live. It's just that the Russian war has turbocharged it. And maybe you guys are all so young, so you'll probably be alive 60 years from now reading history books and telling your great-grandchildren about the times you went through. And maybe these history books will say that the Russian war was the catalyst for a turbocharged green transition, which in the end ended up helping to save the world. So, history is a funny thing, and something that might look tragic and horrible to us today, and it is tragic and horrible, especially for the poor people of Ukraine who are suffering from this invasion and being killed. But maybe in the long run, it will turn out to have been something very good for the world.
I actually have 4 questions to ask you. And the first question is is this whole green transition of energy, is it actually a plan to eradicate the normal way we absorb energy from the crude oil and natural gas? Is this green energy thing you're talking about, is it a way to eradicate it, or is it just a politically inclined something just to tackle Russia?
No. I mean, it's something we have to go through anyway. I mean, basically by 2050, by and large, at the very least, the sort of the developed countries of the world are committed to carbon neutrality. So they're committed to having economies that do not emit carbon into the environment. And this they will do through implementing green transition. This has been agreed. Now, whether or not the political will to enact all the decisions that have been taken was there before the war, I don't know, because the green transition will lead to a lot of disruptions of normal life. People are used to life as it is, and if they're told that they have to pay more for their cars, or they have to pay more for their fuel, or they have to pay more for the energy to heat their homes, they don't like it. But it has to happen if we want to save the planet. Now, but to push through those types of decisions is always politically difficult. But the Russian war means that these decisions will be pushed through. And they will not only be pushed through as they were planned originally, but probably much faster. So when I was saying earlier on that the green transition has been turbocharged by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what I mean is that if there were basic understandings of how the green transition should be carried out before the Russian war, after the Russian invasion, it's going to happen even much faster.
And then, sorry, my second question is considering this whole green energy and the effect it's going to have on distribution of natural gas and oil, and looking at countries like United States, which is the third largest, exporting oil countries in the world, and which they have a very, very huge say in the world economy and the world economy circulation. Do we feel like countries like USA, do you feel like they will allow things like this kind of very beautiful plant, like this energy something? Do you think, based on US is a capitalist country, that everybody knows that they just believe and everything is just free, anything that go to this, if it's not going to favor them in the economy, they will most likely not support it. So now, I feel like the EU coming with a big plan like this, it also feel like it's going to become a political battle between the US and the EU, because definitely it's going to affect the economy. And do you think it's going to work perfectly if the US is not in fully support of it?
Well, listen. Let me. I think you in your question you're showing that you understand the sort of underlying trends or underlying pressures that determine political decision making in democratic countries. And obviously in the US, you're quite right. The US is largely self-sufficient in terms of energy. If you forget a little bit about, the need to save the planet, and you just look at, the self-interest on a day-to-day basis of America, then of course America doesn't feel the pressure of affecting a rapid green transition the way Europe does. Europe, Japan, South Korea are the developed countries that have the most to gain from a very, very rapid green transition. They are also likely to be the technological leaders in this green transition if they push through the most radical reforms, the most radical green transition. America will probably be slower for the simple reason that the lobby of the energy industry in America is stronger. There are lots of large parts of America where the politicians need the support of the people, and the people are somehow related to the various energy-related industries and so forth. So, but in America, there is still a majority of people and politicians willing to implement the green transition. It's just that it's going to come with some compromises, and it's not going to be as rapid as in Europe. But the speed of the transition, therefore, will to some extent vary from country to country, and probably, as I said, the countries that already, are largely self-sufficient in energy based on fossil fuels, they will not feel as feel the immediate need to rush things the way those countries who basically are dependent on Russian fossil fuels feel. But it will happen. And so Europe, I think, therefore, will take the lead. If you want to be in green industries, in basically in industries that drive the green transition in the coming decades, there's no better place to be than in the European Union. We will be leading the world in the green transition here. And that's because it's in our interest to do so. And therefore it's politically, we can push these decisions through politically. Easier maybe than, it can be done in Canada or America or Australia or somewhere.
Sorry, I'm asking you some questions.
Is he always the one asking the questions?
Sorry,
Do you mind if we take somebody else's question in between, and then we come back to your
I
question?
have a question.
Yeah.
So this green energy plan, it's a big thing, like for industries that want to maybe assist the EU to make this thing work before 2030. Now, I'm looking at we students, like how can we work towards that goal? Like how can we be in the industry? Because it's more like for big industries and not like just little startups. Like how does it apply to us? Like how can we make it work by ourselves?
Well, I mean, you're wrong. It's not just the big industries. There are a growing number of green startups. Looking at any number of sort of aspects of the green transition. Starting from energy efficiency, where there's an enormous amount of work to do. We need to make our electricity grid intelligent, so all kinds of IT startups working on that. My businesses are working with basically all the universities here in Estonia, for example, like Tartu and Tallinn Technical University and the Agricultural University on agricultural sort of ag tech startups. How do you produce energy out of basically the biomass. How to, for example, use mycelium and agricultural waste to produce panels without the application of heat that can be used in insulation. And I mean, just endless numbers of opportunities. Now, what you want, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, you basically go out and you find out what's going on, what the startups are doing, if you like to work in small companies. And you try to find yourself a startup with people you like and doing something you find interesting and you believe in, and you can be a part of the green transition in a small company, but you can also be part of the green transition in a big company, because the green transition is going to totally change the economy as we know it. And it's going to mean that young people will have a fantastic opportunity to go in, learn about the things that are needed for the green transition at the ground level, and you will actually then have something very valuable, because a lot of older people who will find it difficult to adjust to the new world. And but there's going to be so much opportunity. You shouldn't be afraid. I mean, it's not going to be just the big companies. I would think that, in fact, the startups will be a big driving force in the green transition. Yeah.
I've got a question. As a normal person, it's a good plan for Europe. Okay, they want to collapse the Russian economy, but what will be in the Europe? Like 2 months before, there was electricity price was going high. Right now we see the oil price is also going high. So if they are planning to stop import everything from Russia, so what will be in the Europe? Every price will be going high, and this plan, it will take time to implement. But before implement this green energy, what will do in Europe?
Yeah, prices will go higher. You're absolutely right. This is where political leadership comes in. I wrote an article that was published in today's Postimees, the biggest newspaper here, and where basically I sort of drew the parallels between, I don't know if any of you have read George Orwell's 1984, very famous novel. 1984 is a novel written in 1949. It was about, a world the name 1984 came from the world. I mean, the novel took place in 1984 in a state where free will and free thought had been banned. So-called the famous Big Brother was watching everyone. The state had what it referred to as a truth monopoly. So the state could tell people whatever they wanted, and people, were obliged to believe in whatever it was the state told. This nightmare society is actually increasingly like the sort of societies we see in Russia and we see in China. I think, if you want to become sort of philosophical about it, the world is facing a battle between freedom and autocracy. And because of the way technology is developing, the ability of autocratic regimes like Russia and China to impose their information on their populations is just getting better and better. The fact is that I think I read somewhere 70% of the Russian population support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They do that because they have no access to free information. They just, when they turn on the TV or the radio or whatever else, they just get the so-called truth monopoly truth. Whatever truth it is that the state wants to say is the truth. So they're being told that the brave Russian soldiers are in Ukraine to free the Ukrainians from horrible Nazis who kill children and women and whatever. And they believe it because they have no other source of information. It's scary because it's scary to see how people basically, can come to believe what they hear on TV or on radio. These are very normal people, I should imagine, these 70% who basically think what Russia is doing in Ukraine is very acceptable and in fact is a good thing. What we are therefore are facing is something much more important than worrying about whether energy prices will be high or lower. So political leadership in the free world, where democracy rules, has to put freedom higher, the value of freedom higher than the price of oil or the price of energy. There was a big question of whether or not we could push through politically the green transition up until before the war, because there were so many people who were arguing, oh yeah, green transition is all very good, and I think it's good. We should stop polluting and everything else. But I don't want to pay more for my petrol. I don't want to pay more for my I don't want my utility bills to rise. This is how people thought, and it's logical. It's natural. Now, I think there is a greater willingness to understand that we're dealing here with much bigger things. It's easier for the average European to understand that we have to defeat this horrible monster in Moscow than it is to understand that if we don't do something about global warming, then 70 years from now the world will have some very, very, very severe problems. That's a much harder argument to make politically than to say that, listen, this guy invaded a country for no reason, killing innocent people, and maybe we're next. So let's get on with it. Let's do something about it. So yes, I agree with what you say. It is an issue. It's a political problem. Putin has given us the means to overcome that problem. We now have an argument. Even those people who maybe were not so keen on the green transition because they believe that maybe it's all fabricated, maybe it's not real. Well, most of them probably don't have a problem understanding that we have to cut back on importing fuel from Russia in order not to finance his war machine.
I have a question, please.
Yep, whatever.
So we understand that we work on this green energy and all sorts. We'll stop financing the Russian regime, right?
Yeah.
So now the question is that Putin himself does not like value his own people. Like I can see when they protest, you see you see police arresting these people. So now if we're not financing their economy, are we not like just arming the people? Like does it like really affect Putin and the government?
Listen, Putin is reputedly, I don't know, the second richest man on earth or the richest man on earth or whatever, because he's been stealing money, for what? How many years has he been in power now? I mean, getting over 20 years. He probably doesn't care, on a personal level. But if we don't send him $1 billion every day, he's not going to have the money to build up or rebuild his war machine. We have sanctioned the economy also in other forms. So he no longer has access to microchips. The Russian economy is a very, very primitive economy. They can't produce microchips. So believe it or not, but all these Russian missiles that are killing innocent people in the Ukraine use Western or Taiwanese or South Korean chips. And they are not being supplied to Russia anymore. So the Russian energy production even is dependent on Western technology. Russia basically, in the long run, cannot survive, even if we forget this $1 billion a day that we're paying him for the energy. Without Western technology, the Russian economy is too primitive to survive. It's going to take time, and unfortunately, as I explained answering another question, innocent Russian people will suffer because their living standards are going to collapse. But luckily, Russia produces enough food, so I don't think they're going to starve to death or anything. But their living standards will collapse. Now, what does that mean for Putin in the long run? I don't know, but I find it hard to believe that any political regime, however ruthless and however much he might be willing to kill endless numbers of Russians to stay in power, he can't do it endlessly.
Maybe we have this first, and then you go first.
Firstly, thanks for coming in, and I'm unfortunate that I couldn't attend the entire thingy. My question pertains more into the circular economy of things.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, the last slide, of course, was more directed towards our cutting off the dependency. And of course, that helps manufacturing hugely and retail because we drive cars still. My question is, how much of it is going to impact that? When you look at the circular economy, there is retail consumption, right? I'm trying to think of a very rudimentary form of it. When it comes to the consumer end and their awareness of, hey, you know what, I want to buy sustainable goods or get into sustainable things. Is there like a transition that is happening in there as well? Because
yes, but it's let's put it this way. There are, of course, more and more consumers who, believe in the green transition, who would like to buy things that are environmentally sustainable, and you can see that in a lot of products, that there is a premium paid for environmentally sustainable products and so forth. But that's not enough to drive the green transition. That's not enough to drive the move towards a circular economy. The move towards a circular economy, and for that matter, the green transition, will be driven by political decisions and will be implemented through the regulatory and legal system. So we're going to have laws and regulations that force companies and force consumers and everybody in between to basically abide by the new normal, the way it's going to be going forward.
Adding to what my classmate said, this new green economy we're talking about, from my own perspective, I'm saying it I can say it's in ways trying to enforce a kind of new new circular economy of people, like that's talking about the consumers and the suppliers. Like I feel like in a way right now, because if this new economy, this new green economy comes into place at some point in the beginning of this new transition here, I believe that there's going to be a very, very high cost of production, because it's not something that we are used to. It's going to be pretty much expensive, I guess, so than the regular one, at least for the first 3, 4, 5 years it comes into place. I mean, not like don't see it in a way like if things are getting much more expensive, that in a way like can cause some kind of like inflation in the countries now. Let's now look at smaller countries that are just growing up in their economy. And don't you think it's going to crumble a lot of economy, a lot of countries' economy? Now let's not take it to the third world countries, so-called third world countries like the Africans and the Asians and that have struggling economies. Like if this kind of thing is enforced, like this new world transition, don't think it's going to crumble a whole lot of growing economies. And I feel like it's going to like just shift the whole world power from the whole people that we know that have the world power now. I feel like it's going to be like a whole new transition of world power from some set of countries to another set of country. And I feel like the people at some point now is not going to be a point of at which the countries that have the higher green something will be the one deciding for most countries. Don't you think like this is driving towards like a monopoly of power towards some certain countries? Like it's just like around the world.
I have to say that I'm impressed by the quality of a lot of the questions today, and you touched upon something that is important and true. Actually, what the green transition and the move towards a circular economy means is that there is going to be if over the last, since 1990 roughly, we've gone through an era of globalization. Economic activity has moved from the developed world to the emerging world, led by investments flows. Investors have basically felt that the emerging countries are going to grow faster than the developed countries, and there is money to be made there, and this has led to a shift in production and a lot of economic activity towards the emerging countries. So, if we look at the percentage of a total global output, let's say 1990, that was made in the developed Western countries versus the emerging countries of the world, then clearly the percentage of global output from Western countries has dropped very significantly, and the percentage of global output that is produced in emerging markets has risen. Green transition will definitely slow this down, the only way we can try to help alleviate the effects is through sort of international agreements on providing transfers of capital to sort of help offset some of these impacts. That's in the short term. In the longer term, of course, we'll be back to a global world. Globalization is not dead, but we are going to see a slowdown in globalization. This cannot be helped, and this slowdown in globalization is driven to a very large extent by the green transition, by the fact that in addition to capital flows from the West to the emerging markets, the other factor that led to this shift in output, of course, was the fact that emerging markets were basically suppliers of energy and resources to the West. And this will slow down. But what we need smart young people like you to think of, okay, great, I don't know what your future plans are. Are you going to stay in Europe to work, or are you going to work somewhere else in the world? But it's in your hands. You guys can help make the future of the world better. But probably you cannot combat the great international trends. So we have come out of 3 decades of very rapid globalization. Now we're going to move towards probably 1, maybe 2 decades of this slowing down probably quite significantly, and we're going to see much more economic dynamism, for example, in Europe in particular, as Europe moves away from basically having to pay for most of its energy and become self-sufficient. But in the long run, we'll be back. Globalization will be back. So, in the very long run, as long as we keep this planet alive and the green transition is key to that, then in the very long run, the world will eventually be, it's never going to be, equality is impossible. There is no equality in a society. There can never be, and there's never going to be total equality in the world. But we're going to move towards more and more equality, I hope. Very good question, and unfortunately the answer is that you're right.
Okay, so I have a question. Okay, everything that we are talking about here is how to make Russia pay for what they did to Ukraine. So now I want to ask, after this, after everything has been arranged, and what happens to Ukraine? Because two weeks ago, I saw in the news that the Ukraine president Zelensky, yes.
Very few people would have known his name a few weeks ago. So.
Yeah. So he pleaded that Ukraine should join the EU. So I want to know, how is this going to happen? Is Ukraine going to finally join the EU? After all this means transition has
both. I mean, it wants to join both. But what we are likely to see is the following. Depending upon how the war, now I'm not talking about sanctions, I'm talking about the actual war. Depending upon how the war in the Ukraine goes, the outcome could vary a lot. But so if the Ukrainians basically manage, and who would have thought 3 weeks ago that the Ukrainians would still be fighting and would be fighting successfully? It is an incredible example of a brave people willing to fight for their country, willing to fight for their freedom. Unbelievable. I'm so surprised, but I'm so happy and so proud to see that happening. I mean, if they manage to defeat the Russians, which 2 weeks ago, even 3 weeks ago, would have been deemed as impossible, now every day that goes by, it's beginning to look like maybe it could happen. If they defeat, then I think what will happen is that the West has already frozen the Russian reserves in the West, about 300 billion. We're basically requisitioning the assets of these oligarchs who lived off the Russian system, but took their money and then lived a good life in the West. And I think what's going to happen is that a big part of the rebuilding of the Ukraine will be financed from basically just the Russian assets that have been sequestered by the Western states. It will be paid to Ukraine as war reparations. It will never go back to Russia. But of course, that's not going to be enough. I think the damage that's being done to Ukraine goes way beyond what can be financed from what we have taken from the Russians now in terms of these sanctions. So I think the West will have to finance. There's already talk of a Marshall Plan. I think there's going to be an absolutely massive rebuilding effort. I think this will happen even if for some reason we cannot use the Russian funds. The West will still finance the rebuilding of Ukraine. And personally, and I have a lot of experience of Ukraine. I've spent a lot of time there. I had big businesses there. I can say that and I talk to people who my former employees and so forth regularly now these days. And I think the mindset of the Ukraine has been changed by this war. So Ukraine was a very corrupt country. According to Transparency International, whatever it's called, that measures corruption, Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Russia was even more corrupt, but I mean, they were both at the very, very end of the table. I think the new Ukraine that will be that will be born out of this conflict is going to be a Ukraine where these types of issues will not be as bad as they were in the past. So Ukraine will come out of this stronger. The people will be united. They will no longer accept the corruption that was led by these local oligarchs and so forth. They will elect a political leadership that will be committed to integrating the country into the West, but at the same time that will understand that in order to integrate Ukraine into the West, in order to become a member of the European Union and NATO, the country has to undergo big reforms. We cannot have a corrupt Ukraine as a member of the European Union. We have to have a European Ukraine as a member of the European Union. So Ukraine has to undertake reforms, but it will be helped. Ukraine now has so many friends. There will be no lack of capital to help Ukraine rebuild. So politically also that's important, because Ukraine after the war will basically be, a humming place. There will be massive rebuilding. It's going to be financed hopefully by, the confiscated Russian assets and maybe Russian war reparations, but also by the West. In the meantime, the Russian economy will continue to experience sanctions as long as Putin and his regime are in power. So, the world also in this sort of, or say Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, will be very different. Will be very, very different after this war, so let's see.
So recently we are hearing that Russia and Ukraine want to get into a peace talk. I don't know how far is this going. Like, what is the peace talk all about?
Well, I wish I knew. I think. I mean, I'm obviously following what's happening in Ukraine very closely, and it's very obvious that not only am I and most of the world are very surprised by the defense of their country being put up by the Ukrainians. I think the Russians are very, very surprised. What is also interesting is to see how the so-called, everybody thought that Russia had a really, really efficient war machine. Everybody thought that Russia had really, really powerful weapons. It turns out that Russia's a joke. Their soldiers don't want to fight. They're abandoning their tanks and running away. I mean, the morale is extremely low. Their weapon systems are, compared to Western systems, are useless. So I cannot help thinking that there must be somebody sitting in a bunker somewhere in the Ural Mountains, or I don't know where Putin is hiding, thinking that maybe we should be talking about peace, because maybe things aren't going to get any better. Maybe things are only going to get worse. And so if that's what Putin is thinking, then maybe there will be peace. But, I can say from having talked to so many Ukrainians over the last 2 weeks, Ukraine is not going to give up. Ukraine is going to go on fighting. We are supplying weapons to the Ukraine. All the time, the weapons we're supplying to the Ukraine are becoming more sophisticated. The amounts of weapons we're supplying to the Ukraine, is, we don't talk about it, but we're talking about very, very large quantities of weapons. They're all defensive weapons at the moment, but they're becoming more sophisticated. We're sending them more sophisticated anti-aircraft systems. We're going to, as time goes on, the pressure, and the Ukrainians, they have no lack of manpower. There are people lining up to fight in the army. The army, can only absorb so many new people. They have, endless numbers of people that are willing to sign up, and it's just a question of training, getting them weapons, and then sending them into battle. I'm also told that what I haven't read about so much in the papers, but what I'm told by my Ukrainian friends is that the resistance in these areas that, when you look at the map and they show these red areas that are supposedly controlled by Russia, the resistance in these areas is growing. So more and more, bands of partisan fighters are there attacking the supply lines of the Russian troops and so forth. It looks like, maybe I'm optimistic, but it looks like potentially what Russia could be facing in the Ukraine is a total collapse. In other words, the logistics system collapses, morale collapses, and these Russian units that are there will be surrounded by Ukrainians and basically will be forced to surrender, which of course would be an absolute cataclysmic disaster for Putin and his regime. So if that is what's really starting to happen, then I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians are willing to negotiate a peace settlement.
Actually, I have some kind of 5 questions.
How many questions?
5 questions. Like the question is maybe more like the conclusion, but it can be. First of all, is in the companies, for example, patents. I don't understand why companies in Russia, for example, Russian Federation, they need to confiscate it. Because, for example, McDonald's, they don't give any kind of money. They're just taking companies for the Russian companies and sell it. And I don't believe in this national strategy, totally not. And actually, microchips, Taiwan. We are making microchips in Asia, we are making chips in Canada and other countries. But moment is, for example, as we're Estonian people, we have a lot of IT guys, and they know how to work with this. I think, for example, they can just create some kind of algorithms to destroy these chips because they were the developers. And the mechanics, they know how to make a bigger power because I just worked in this sphere a bit and I can just believe it's possible. And the moment is immigrants. For example, when I just lived here around 2 years, I saw some kind of big problem. Immigrants, people without anything, and they don't agree with us. For example, they live in European Union just because of the financial support. They don't believe in any rules, they don't want to learn anything. It doesn't mean only the language of the country, it doesn't mean by the nationality and the culture, whatever it is. It's the moment is, for example, they don't want to develop it, they don't want to create something. They came to develop the structure, they came to develop the country itself, the European Union, but they don't want. And in future, for example, when we will take 5 immigrants from Ukraine, I'm not sure these 5 million immigrants, they know how to do it. Because Moldova said goodbye immigrants, Germany said goodbye immigrants, Polish people say sorry, thank you, but hold on. And I'm not sure for the Baltic countries how they will live. And I think, for example, we need to, based on it, make the 5th conclusion. Houses and infrastructure in Ukraine was crushed. Everything was destroyed. And the European Union can, I don't see should. They, for example, can think about one moment. They can invest in this infrastructure to find a strategical, some kind of partner. Because Ukraine was, for example, in the Soviet Union, the country who is created the aviation. And I don't believe these people are stupid. I don't believe, because I have Ukrainian people and a bit Ukrainian rule. Ukrainian blood, a bit, from Sevastopol, from Crimea. And, yeah. Moment is, for example, I think, for example, the European Union can find some kind of part of Ukraine who is agree with our rules, with our story. Because European Union right now in a moment where they can just die or leave. Because in Italy, productions in sunny Italy, they stop right now. Most of them, without gas. But, transition, for example, from Hungary, from Serbia, can, for example, give for us a chance to leave. Because we can just take for them and leave again. But the moment is, for example, I worked some kind of times in laboratory in Caltech as an engineer, and the moment was we have so much clever guys. They have an idea, they have a project, they have a prototypes, but investments they don't come. Why? You can say hackathons, okay, goodness, but the moment is hackathons. They are really partly, really short time. We have thousands of them who can develop it, who is agree with our some kind of story. Because we came here not because we want to take some kind of knowledge. We came here to be in a part of it, to make it like a family. And I think, for example, European Union can just create a new kind of type of immigration. It's a type with our identity, with our mental identity, not blood identity. Because mental health, for example, it's not like in the blood. We are totally different. You are Estonian person, you are Estonian people. We are, for example, Asian people, partly European, and but in the same reason. The moment is, in our minds, we have the same rules, and I think it will be a good point to integrate in our life.
Well, I think I can only agree with you that you know, the European Union needs to integrate you know, smart people who want to come and live here and work here. I think we also have a moral duty to help immigrants, you know, from Ukraine. For God's sake, it's, you know, they have nowhere to go. I mean, their homes have been destroyed. Now, the important thing is like, okay, I represent a liberal party, and you know, we stand for you know, the idea of an open society. So we believe that everybody has the right to you know, who's here, who gets into the European Union. They have the right to. They have the same right to create happiness and success for themselves as anybody else. You know, you know, obviously, maybe I didn't understand all the various parts of your thoughts, but I do agree that, of course, you know, everybody understands that you know, there's a limit to how much immigration we can absorb. I mean, we can't take in, you know, 100 million people just like that. But we need to be open, and the strength of, for example, I believe, of why America has been so successful is that it's been open to immigration. I believe that we in the European Union have to be the same. We have to be open to immigration. The European Union is a political entity that is not, you know, we are not, you know, defined by what we look like. We're defined by the fact that we want our people who live here to feel like they want to belong and feel like they want to make their lives here and want to contribute to our society and our economy. And if they're willing to do that, they are just as much a citizen of the European Union as everybody else. That is important. Now, I'm liberal, you know, and I guess you all know that there are also political forces that maybe in Europe that maybe don't share my views, but they are luckily a minority. They're not very significant, and you know. people like me certainly do our best to keep it that way. But when it comes to helping people who have escaped from a catastrophe, i.e. humanitarian catastrophe, then we mustn't look only at, let's say, the economic part of the equation. We mustn't say that you woman there with 5 children, you can't come in here because we don't see how you're going to help our economy. That's not what it's about. It's about being human, understanding that these people have nothing. I have personally housed now over 30 Ukrainian refugees. I'm paying for buses to go back and forth to take aid to the border with between Poland and Ukraine and bring back refugees. Many people like me are doing something to help, and I think a very large part of the refugees coming from the Ukraine are being helped by private people like myself. Are not, they're not being, it's not all being paid for by the taxpayers. Yes, the European Union needs to stand for ideals that are greater than just economic well-being or the cost of petrol. So we believe in the green transition, and we have to push the green transition and the circular economy because we believe in saving the planet. We have to help Ukrainian refugees because we are human. We believe in humanity. But we have to welcome everybody who can come and wants to come and contribute and live here. We need to welcome them and give them, the best potential opportunity to be, fully accepted member of our community with all the upside that entails.
Thank you.
Very last question.
Okay, we can take only one very quick question.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm very sorry. Like, I think for the longest right now, petrol has been and natural gas has been a very sophisticated industry that has very least threats to something that can subsidize it. Now, talking as a creativity and business student here, from things that we've learned in school right now, to make a successful business and successful thing that's successful anything, you have to look at some things that can be a threat to that business. Now, taking this green economy to a case study right now. As you can see, green economy is something that's there to tackle the whole normal way we produce energy. That's is a big threat to the normal way the petrol, natural gas is a big threat to revolving it. Now let's look at it on the long run for the green energy. What do you feel can be the biggest threat not to making this green energy work, or the biggest threat?
The biggest threat is politics. The biggest threat is that if the cost of the green transition is very high, if it turns out that it leads to unexpectedly high increase in energy prices or whatever else, then the threat is that the political consensus might start to fail. That, if I as a politician, let's say, we have elections here in March, so next year. So elections go well, I become the new finance minister and I announce to everybody that, we stand for a green transition, and then journalists and others ask me, well, what does it mean? What does it mean to the prices of energy and food and petrol and whatever? And I give more or less some sort of answers based on what I believe. And then it turns out, surprise, surprise, that in fact I was optimistic, and it's all worse. The prices go up even more. Then all of a sudden people will say, well, this guy is useless. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's have somebody else, we'll vote for somebody else. And then maybe, the political parties that maybe oppose the green transition might do very well. Politics is the biggest threat. Politics is driven by public opinion. And unfortunately, there are many people out there who who don't look very far into the future when they decide on how to vote. And so people like me, we face a never-ending need to explain why the green transition is necessary, why the world, the planet needs the green transition. We have no choice, we have no alternative. But we live in a democracy, so we have to convince the people.
Joakim, do you agree to answer one more question?
Okay, one more question.
And please keep it short.
Okay, for example, I want to refer to be in a personal. First of all, I'm not agree with, I'm close with anyone. I'm totally free from them, but I think, for example, we need to support the Ukraine, to take it to the European Union, and to help them with managing. Because when we will give them money to help them to manage it in a good way. I mean this. And all of these problems with any kind of patents, chips, whatever, they will going to be solved. Because European Union, how I think, we have a big practical ideas. We have practical knowledge how to manage it. And I think, for example, I'm totally sure we will achieve anything together. But it's a question, for example, when Ukraine will be a part of the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, I hope for the best. But the only thing I can say is that we live in a world that's becoming harder and harder to predict. It just, we are, it seems like every year something new, unexpected comes up. So, we had COVID. We have this whole the overarching challenge is the green transition. We have to save the planet in the long run. Then we have COVID. Now we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, sorry?
You have something new also.
What?
Yesterday, India mistakenly fired a missile to Pakistan.
Mistakenly,
yes.
they just fire
accidentally fire a missile in Pakistan.
Oh, God forbid,
So that's something coming.
Well, it sounds like it's not going to get any easier. So.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.